Welcome to another episode of the Midnight Investigator, where we take an alternative look at moments in history. Today, we look into the shadowy legacy of a near-forgotten Saxon king. His life brief, his battles brutal. But could this just be the man behind the myth of King Arthur? Edmund II of England, better known as Edmund Ironside, reigned briefly in 1016 during one of the most turbulent periods in English history. His nickname, Ironside, was earned not through myth, but by grit and steel. His defiance of Viking conquest made him a figure of raw courage, and perhaps, just perhaps, one of the real-life echoes that inspired the King Arthur legend. To understand Edmund's rise, we must begin with his father, King Ethelred the Unready. Ethelred ruled from 978 to 1016 and inherited the throne as a boy following the assassination of his half-brother, Edward the Martyr. His epithet, unready, comes from the Old English word meaning poor counsel, rather than unprepared. Ethelred the Unready's reign was marked by poor decisions, growing unrest, and relentless Danish invasions. One of his most infamous choices was the St. Brice's Day massacre on the 13th November in 1002, when Danish settlers living in England were ordered to be slaughtered. Instead of securing the realm, the act only deepened tensions and provoked brutal retaliation from across the sea. One pivotal moment during Ethelred's rule was the Battle of Maldon in 991, where an English force under Earl Byrhtnoth attempted to resist Viking raiders. Despite their courage, the English were defeated. The battle was immortalized in an Old English poem, emphasizing heroic sacrifice. It was at Maldon that the Viking onslaught truly began, relentless, punishing, and destined to shake the kingdom's foundations. By the early 11th century, Canute, the son and heir of the Danish king Sweyn Forkbeard, launched a full-scale invasion. Ethelred's power waned, and with London under threat, he fled to Normandy in exile. Upon Forkbeard's death in 1014, Ethelred returned to the throne but was weakened and surrounded by treachery. This was the moment Edmund Ironside stepped into the spotlight. As his father's grip weakened, Edmund took control, defying indecision with bold military campaigns. He cemented alliances by marrying Ealhgeith, widow of a Danish noble, gaining crucial support in the Danelaw community. Edmund was already proving himself a man of action, and a man of decisive leadership. When Ethelred died in April 1016, London declared Edmund king, while other nobles supported Canute. Edmund faced a divided kingdom and an enemy entrenched on English soil. But he did not hesitate, and the fight back had just begun. Over the course of 1016, Edmund fought no fewer than 5 major battles as he pursued the Vikings around England. First came the Battle of Penselwood in Somerset, likely fought in early summer, a bloody encounter in wooded terrain. Though no decisive winner emerged, it proved that Edmund was prepared to take the fight directly to Canute's forces. Then came the Battle of Schurston in Wiltshire, a savage 2-day clash where exhaustion met iron. Neither side could claim victory, but the message was clear: Edmund would not yield. His resistance was fierce, his stamina relentless. The war was grinding down both armies, but Edmund kept standing. Next came the siege of London and the breakout at Brentford. Canute encircled the capital, aiming to crush its spirit. But Edmund struck from the outside with a daring assault, forcing the Danes to fall back. At Brentford, his counterattack was bold and brilliant, but costly. Many English warriors drowned chasing the retreating Danes across the Thames. Still, the morale of the Saxons surged. They had proven they could push back. Then came the Battle of Otford in Kent, an unmistakable Saxon victory. Edmund shattered the Danish lines and sent them fleeing. In the aftermath, the notorious traitor Edric Striana, who had once betrayed Ethelred and sided with Canute, sought redemption. He rejoined Edmund. Whether this was forgiveness or strategy, it would prove a dangerous mistake. These were not isolated skirmishes. They were a campaign of survival and defiance, fought across the breadth of southern England. Again and again, Edmund gathered new forces, often outnumbered, always at risk. He moved with speed, struck with purpose, and led from the front. And slowly the tide began to shift. Canute, the invader, the conqueror, was driven onto the defensive. For a fleeting moment, it looked as though the Saxons might rise again, that their kingdom could be reclaimed. Okay, so we can establish one thing with certainty. Modern films and TV series often paint the Vikings as cunning, ruthless masterminds always outwitting those who dare oppose them. But Edmund Ironside's campaign tells a different story. Here was a man who didn't cower before their reputation. Outnumbered at times, surrounded by betrayal, he still stood his ground. He fought them head-on, again and again, across fields, forests, and rivers. The so-called legend of Viking invincibility of fear and dominance did not hold here. Not against Ironside. In this chapter of history, the Saxon was the storm. But all stories have turning points. And that's when we come to the Battle of Ascendon in Ashington, Essex. On the 18th of October, 1016, the final showdown came. Edmund led a seasoned but weary army drawn from Wessex and Mercia. The location, believed to be Ashington Hill, placed the battle on difficult, muddy terrain. As the English shield wall formed, betrayal struck. Edric Strina, once again, turned traitor. Whether by prearranged signal or sudden treachery, he withdrew his men at a crucial moment. This shattered the cohesion of the English line. Confusion spread. What might have been a stand for the ages became a bloody rout. Edmund, undeterred, threw himself into the fray. Chroniclers describe him cutting through enemies with a ferocity that earned his title. But bravery alone could not change the tide. Defeated but unbowed, Edmund met with Canute. Rather than continue a war of attrition, they agreed to divide England. Edmund retained Wessex. Canute took the north. Just weeks later, on the 30th of November, 1016, Edmund died at age 26. Whether from wounds or assassination remains a mystery. Canute assumed full control of England. Edmund was buried at Glastonbury Abbey beside his grandfather Edgar the Peaceful. And here begins one of the most curious threads in this story, the Arthurian connection. Centuries later, Glastonbury Abbey would claim to have discovered King Arthur's tomb. By the 13th century, monks had placed the tombs of English kings, including Edmund Ironside, beside Arthur's. Whether political symbolism or genuine reverence, it linked Edmund to Britain's legendary past. And there are striking parallels. Both were warrior kings. Both defended their land against foreign invasion. Both were betrayed in their final battle. Both died young, their deaths symbolizing the end of an era. The King Arthur legends emerge in a very different era, roughly the 5th to 6th centuries, during post-Roman Britain. Arthur first appears in later Welsh and Celtic sources, such as the Historia Brittonum and Anno Cambria, where he is depicted as a warlord defeating Saxon invaders, with his climactic battles around 500 to 540 AD. Notably, 6th century writers like Gildas do not name Arthur, and the early accounts blend history and myth. By the 12th century, writers like Geoffrey of Monmouth had made Arthur a fully legendary figure, a king of wonder, leader of the Round Table, and more. In short, Arthur's origins lie in ancient Brittonic folklore, not in 11th century events. Edmund Ironside lived about 500 years later, as an Anglo-Saxon king. There's no medieval source that connects him to the Arthur cycle. In fact, to contemporary writers, Edmund was simply one of the last Saxon rulers, not a pseudo-historical founder of myth. Only after the Norman conquest were Saxon kings sometimes retroactively tied to Arthurian ideas. For example, Glastonbury Abbey in the 13th century reburied King Arthur's legendary tomb alongside those of Saxon kings. According to a medieval account, Edmund Ironside and his great-grandfather Edmund were placed on either side of Arthur's tomb, symbolically linking them in a royal mausoleum of kings. This was a deliberate attempt by Henry III's abbey to burnish royal lineage, not an assertion that Edmund was Arthur. In reality, Edmund's sons were exiled after Canute's conquest, but one, Edward the Exile, returned. His daughter Margaret became Queen of Scotland. Through her, Edmund's bloodline lived on, flowing through the veins of future British monarchs. Meanwhile, in Essex, one can still walk the slopes of Ashington Hill. Nearby lies Battlesbridge, a village some have romantically linked to the battle. But historians suggest its name comes from the Betrayal family, not from any conflict. The real site of Ascendon remains debated, but Ashington remains the strongest candidate. So, was Edmund Ironside a root of the Arthur legend? Historically, no. The Arthur story predates Edmund, rooted in post-Roman Celtic traditions and later embellished by Norman and French Romanticism. But symbolically? Absolutely. Edmund Ironside was indeed a valiant warrior king. He fought tirelessly for England in 1016 and earned respect even from his enemies. His life has much in common with the themes of Arthurian romance: courage against odds, betrayal, tragic end, but historical evidence shows no direct link to the King Arthur legend. Arthur's story originates in an earlier age and in different cultural traditions. So Edmund remains a distinct later figure. Today, Edmund's legend survives among historians and local traditions, while Arthur endures as a timeless myth. Both remind us of Britain's rich tapestry of history and folklore, but one is rooted in medieval chronicles and the other in medieval imagination. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that insight into one of the lesser-known kings of England. You've been watching the Midnight Investigator. If this interests you, please like and subscribe. We will be back for more investigations. In the meantime, question everything. Don't let someone else do your thinking.